Galactic Station 7's cafeteria buzzed with the controlled chaos of the busiest food court in 3 sectors. The air shimmered with 1,000 different atmospheric preferences, creating rainbow-tinted pockets where various species gathered around tables that defied at least 17 different gravity laws. Steam, smoke, and what could generously be called aromatic vapors rose from food stalls that served everything from crystallized methane soup to live voltaic eels. At the center of this culinary madness stood Quartermaster A, all 6 arms working in perfect harmony as he prepared what he liked to call real food for real beings. His Zephyrian heritage showed in the way his chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh station lighting. And his compound eyes tracked every customer with the precision of a master chef who knew exactly how superior his cooking skills were. He had been running this establishment for 12 cycles now, and not once, not even once, had anyone complained about his food being too mild. Well, except for that unfortunate incident with the Bludarian delegation, but honestly, if you cannot handle a little sulfuric acid in your morning beverage, perhaps you should stick to water. Quartermaster, Admiral Vashi called out, his crystalloid form refracting the light into prismatic patterns as he approached the main counter. His voice carried that particular tone that all military officers seemed to develop, the one that suggested he had seen things that would make civilians weep. The human delegation arrives tomorrow. I trust you have prepared appropriate accommodations for their dietary requirements? Quartermaster A's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. Oh, Admiral, you wound me. When have I ever failed to provide exactly what any species needs? All 6 arms gestured expansively toward his domain. Though I must admit, I am curious about these humans. I have heard such interesting things about their, shall we say, delicate constitutions? Judge Quintera looked up from her datapad, her 3 eyes blinking in sequence as she processed the conversation. As the station's primary legal expert, she made it her business to know the dietary restrictions and cultural taboos of every species that passed through their little corner of space. According to my files, humans subsist primarily on processed nutritional paste and simple carbohydrates. Their digestive systems are remarkably primitive, even by mammalian standards. Hey! General Kraftnog's laugh boomed across the cafeteria, causing several smaller species to duck instinctively. The Bludarian warrior's 4 arms slammed against the table, making the metal ring like a bell. I have fought alongside humans in 3 campaigns. Brave enough, I will grant them that, but they eat like newborn grubs. Everything must be bland, everything must be safe, everything must be, he searched for the word, boring. Admiral Vashi nodded sagely. Indeed. During the Proxima incident, I watched a human medic faint merely from the aroma of our standard ration packs. Their commanding officer had to apologize profusely and explain that their species has an extremely limited tolerance for what they call exotic flavors. Quartermaster A felt his professional pride stirring. Here he was, master of culinary arts that had made hardened space marines weep with joy, and they were suggesting that an entire species might not appreciate his work. The very idea was almost insulting. Almost. Gentlemen, and esteemed judge, he said, his voice taking on that smooth quality that preceded either a brilliant idea or a complete disaster. Perhaps we are being unfair to our human guests. After all, how can we judge their culinary courage without giving them a proper chance? Judge Quintera's central eye focused on him with laser-like intensity. What exactly are you proposing, Quartermaster? A simple test, he replied, beginning to clean his countertop with unnecessary vigor. When the humans arrive, I will prepare them a meal. Not one of those insulting safe-for-all-species dishes, but real food, proper food. If they can handle even the most basic level of actual cuisine, then I will personally apologize for underestimating them. General Kraftnog leaned forward, his scarred features splitting into what might have been a grin on a less terrifying face. And if they cannot? Then I think it is safe to say that every story we have heard about human dietary limitations is absolutely true. Quartermaster A paused dramatically. In fact, I am so confident in this assessment that I am willing to wager on it. Admiral Vashi's form brightened with interest. What sort of wager? If the humans can handle real food, proper alien cuisine, then I will provide a station-wide feast for every being here for an entire month. Free of charge, he gestured with all 6 arms. But if they prove to be as delicate as everyone claims, then each of you pays for that same feast. The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle hissing of pressure cookers and the distant sound of someone's meal trying to escape from their plate. Judge Quintara was the first to speak. That is a considerable sum, Quartermaster. Are you certain about this? My dear Judge, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. General Kraftnog's grin widened. You have yourself a wager, cook. Admiral Vashi extended one crystalline appendage. Agreed. Though I almost feel guilty about taking your money. Quartermaster shook the offered appendage with 3 of his arms simultaneously. Gentlemen Judge, prepare to learn exactly why they call me a master chef. What none of them realized, as they sealed their agreement with the casual confidence of beings who had never encountered a human with access to Carolina Reaper sauce, was that they had just made the most expensive mistake in the history of Galactic Station 7. But that, as they say, is a story for tomorrow. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of a neutron star collapse. Commander Tom Malley stepped through the airlock of Galactic Station 7 with the kind of confident stride that suggested he had never met a problem he could not solve with either diplomacy or controlled explosions. Behind him followed his small crew, Brandon Torres, whose relaxed posture somehow made every alien in the vicinity nervous, and Amy Kowalski, who was already looking around the docking bay with the bright-eyed enthusiasm of someone who had clearly never heard the phrase situational awareness. Word of the wager had spread through the station faster than a hull breach, and by the time the human delegation made their way to the cafeteria, they had acquired quite the audience. Beings from 17 different species had found excuses to be in the food court, each pretending to be absorbed in their own meals while keeping at least one sensory organ focused on the unfolding drama. Moran, a tentacled observer whose species made their living by documenting unusual phenomena, had positioned himself at a strategic table with a clear view of the serving counter. His notebook was already open, stylus poised to record what he fully expected to be a brief and amusing encounter between human digestive limitations and Zephyrian culinary pride. Commander Mali, welcome to Station 7. Admiral Vashi approached with the kind of formal politeness that barely concealed his amusement. I trust your journey was comfortable? Perfectly, Admiral, thank you, Tom Mali replied, his smile suggesting he was either genuinely pleased to be here or was very good at hiding his true feelings. My crew and I are looking forward to experiencing your famous hospitality. Judge Quintara observed from her usual table, taking careful note of the humans' physical appearance. They looked remarkably ordinary. No visible armor plating, no natural weapons, no obvious adaptations for surviving hostile environments. Just soft, pink beings with their internal skeletons on the inside like some kind of evolutionary afterthought. General Kraftnog snorted quietly to himself. These were the beings that had somehow earned a reputation as fierce warriors? They looked like they would bruise if you stared at them too hard. Quartermaster A emerged from behind his counter with the theatrical flair of a master chef about to demonstrate his superiority to the universe. All 6 arms moved in coordinated precision as he arranged what he considered to be appropriate first-course dishes for beings with delicate constitutions. Honored human guests, he announced, his mandibles clicking with barely restrained confidence, I have prepared a selection of our mildest, yet most gentle offerings for your consideration. The first dish was Sartakian cloud soup, a pale, nearly transparent broth that was considered so mild that most species fed it to their sick children. The second was steamed Voltarian moss cakes, which had roughly the same spice level as distilled water. The third was what passed for Zephyrian comfort food, simple grain porridge with the heat level of a gentle summer breeze. Commander Tom Mali examined the offerings with the careful attention of a diplomatic professional. Brandon Torres leaned closer to inspect the dishes, his expression growing increasingly puzzled. Amy Kowalski actually picked up one of the serving utensils and took a small taste of the soup. The silence stretched on just long enough to become uncomfortable. "This is very thoughtful, Quartermaster," Commander Mali said finally, his tone carrying the perfect balance of gratitude and polite confusion. "But I wonder, where do you keep the actual food?" Moran's stylus froze halfway through writing the word predictable. "I beg your pardon?" Quartermaster A's compound eyes focused with laser-like intensity on the human commander. Brandon Torres gestured toward the dishes with genuine bewilderment. "No offense intended, but this looks like what we would serve to someone recovering from stomach surgery. We were hoping to try some real alien cuisine while we are here." Amy Kowalski nodded enthusiastically. The travel guides all mentioned Station 7 as having the most adventurous food court in 3 sectors. "We have been looking forward to this for months." Admiral Vashi felt his crystalline structure vibrate at a frequency that indicated either extreme confusion or impending system failure. Judge Quintara's 3 eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sure sign that her legal mind was struggling to process information that did not fit any known categories. General Kraftnog leaned forward, his scarred features contorting into an expression of pure bewilderment. "You want stronger food?" "Well, yes," Commander Mali replied, as if this should be obvious to anyone with functioning sensory organs. "We came here specifically hoping to experience authentic alien flavors. These seem like they would be perfect for someone with a sensitive stomach, but we were hoping for something with a bit more character." Quartermaster felt his professional world beginning to tilt at an angle that defied several fundamental laws of physics. In 12 cycles of serving food to hundreds of different species, no one had ever looked at his beginner-level dishes and asked where the real food was hidden. Moran began writing furiously, his tentacles moving in patterns that suggested he was witnessing something that would require extensive documentation and possibly peer review. "Perhaps," Quartermaster said slowly, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone navigating completely uncharted territory, "I misunderstood your dietary requirements. When your files mentioned that humans prefer simple, processed foods—" "Oh, that." Brandon Torres waved dismissively. "Those are just emergency rations. Nobody actually enjoys that stuff. We were hoping to try something that would give us a real sense of what other species consider delicious." Amy Kowalski smiled brightly. "The more exotic, the better. We love trying new things." The cafeteria had grown so quiet that the sound of Moran's stylus scratching against paper was audible 3 tables away. Several species had stopped eating entirely, their various digestive processes suspended by sheer confusion. Quartermaster looked at his carefully prepared mild dishes, then at the humans who were regarding them with the kind of polite disappointment usually reserved for gifts from relatives you do not particularly like. His pride as a chef warred with his growing sense that something fundamental about his understanding of the universe had just shifted without warning. "Very well," he said, all 6 arms beginning to move with renewed purpose. "If you insist on authentic cuisine, then authentic cuisine you shall have." What happened next would be talked about in the food courts of 17 different star systems for generations to come. Quartermaster retreated to his kitchen with the determined stride of a chef whose professional reputation was being questioned by beings who apparently did not understand the basic concepts of spice tolerance or self-preservation. His 6 arms worked with mechanical precision as he accessed what he liked to call his Level 2 collection, dishes that required protective gear to prepare and liability waivers to serve. The first dish he brought out was Bludarian fire root stew, a concoction so potent that it had once been used as industrial solvent on 3 different mining colonies. The serving bowl was made of reinforced titanium alloy because anything weaker would have been dissolved within minutes. Steam rose from the surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The second offering was Voltarian acid soup, a delicacy that literally bubbled and hissed as it was served. The spoon he provided was crafted from military-grade ceramic, the kind used in spacecraft hull plating, because metal utensils had a disturbing tendency to disappear entirely when exposed to the broth. The third dish defied easy description, mostly because looking at it too long caused temporary blindness in most species. It was simply known as the Zephyrian Special, and it came with its own warning label written in 17 different languages. Admiral Vashi watched the proceedings with the fascination of someone observing a particularly elaborate form of suicide. His crystalline structure had begun vibrating at frequencies that indicated either extreme anxiety or preparation for emergency evacuation procedures. Commander Tom Malley examined the new offerings with the same diplomatic attention he had shown the previous dishes. Brandon Torres leaned forward, inhaling deeply, and his expression brightened considerably. "Now this looks more promising," Brandon said, reaching for the ceramic spoon. "Mind if I try the soup first?" Before anyone could stop him, he had taken a generous spoonful of the Voltairean acid soup and consumed it with the casual efficiency of someone eating breakfast. The spoon, which had been rated for exposure to temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, began to dissolve at the edges. Admiral Vashi's translator unit emitted a sound that could best be described as electronic screaming before shutting down entirely. His crystalline form flickered between 7 different colors, none of which appeared in any known spectrum. "Oh, this is delightful," Amy Kowalski remarked, helping herself to a portion of the fire root stew that was actively melting the serving ladle. "The flavors are so subtle and complex. There are notes of, is that sulfur? And something that tastes almost like molten copper?" General Kraftnog's jaw dropped. Then his second jaw dropped. His third jaw followed suit, and his fourth jaw, which was generally reserved for extreme emergencies, also descended to its maximum extension. The combined effect made him look like he was attempting to unhinge his entire skull. Judge Quintara had abandoned all pretense of casual observation and was frantically scrolling through her data pad, searching through Galactic food safety regulations for any precedent that might explain what she was witnessing. According to every medical database in known space, what these humans were doing should have resulted in immediate hospitalization followed by lengthy legal proceedings. Moran's writing had become increasingly frantic, his tentacles moving in patterns that suggested he was either experiencing a creative breakthrough or a complete mental breakdown. His notes now covered 3 separate pages and included several diagrams that would have made xenobiology professors weep, with either joy or despair. "Excuse me, Quartermaster," Brandon Torres called out, raising his hand like a student asking a question in class. "Would it be possible to get some extra seasoning for this? It has great potential, but it could use a little more heat." The kitchen behind Quartermaster A fell silent. Even the automated cooking system seemed to pause in shock. Extra seasoning. The human had just consumed something that had once been classified as a controlled substance by the Galactic Safety Council, and he wanted it spicier. "I what?" Quartermaster A's mandibles clicked in a rhythm that indicated complete system failure. "Just a pinch more of whatever gives it that nice burning sensation," Brandon clarified helpfully. "Maybe something with a bit more bite to it?" Amy Kowalski nodded in agreement while casually consuming spoonfuls of soup that were causing visible damage to the table's surface. The ceramic spoon had dissolved entirely, but she seemed to be managing perfectly well with a backup utensil that was rapidly following its predecessor into oblivion. "This really is wonderful," she said, her tone carrying the genuine appreciation of someone who had found exactly what they were looking for. "You can taste the craftsmanship in every drop. Though I do agree with Brandon, a little extra intensity would make it perfect." Morton, the station's chief medical officer, he had received 17 separate emergency alerts from his monitoring systems and was currently preparing the medical bay for what his instruments were convinced would be multiple fatalities. His 4-armed Centaurian physiology allowed him to simultaneously prep surgical equipment, mix antacids, and contact the nearest poison control center. Word of the unfolding situation had spread through the station's communication networks with the speed of a disaster alert. Beings from dozens of different species had begun gathering outside the cafeteria, drawn by reports that ranged from humans committing elaborate suicide to possible new form of performance art involving corrosive beverages. A Mantekian trader who had witnessed 3 different wars and considered himself unshockable pressed his face against the viewing port and immediately regretted his decision. By the 7 moons of Altair, he whispered to his companion, "They are actually eating it." They are eating the Voltarian acid soup and asking for more. His companion, an elderly Sartakian diplomat who had spent 40 years mediating disputes between hostile species, could only stare in silence. In 4 decades of experiencing the most bizarre cultural practices in known space, nothing had prepared him for watching humans treat industrial-strength corrosives as appetizers. Back inside the cafeteria, Commander Tom Mali had moved on to sampling the Zephyrian Special, which was causing the air around his table to shimmer with heat distortion. His expression suggested mild approval, with perhaps just a hint of constructive criticism forming. "Quartermaster," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent food court with perfect clarity. "This is exactly the kind of authentic experience we were hoping for. Thank you for taking our dietary preferences seriously." Quartermaster A stared at his level 2 dishes, which had been designed to challenge the most heat-tolerant species in the galaxy, being consumed by humans as if they were pleasant afternoon snacks. His professional worldview, which had been built over 12 cycles of culinary mastery, was crumbling like poorly mixed concrete in a gravity storm. Moran looked up from his notes, his primary tentacle poised over a page covered in increasingly desperate observations. He had the distinct feeling that he was witnessing something that would require not just documentation, but an entirely new branch of xenobiology to properly explain. The sound of Brandon Torres politely asking if there might be any stronger dishes available echoed through the cafeteria like a challenge to the fundamental laws of physics to themselves. Quartermaster A stood frozen behind his counter, all 6 arms trembling with what could have been either rage or existential terror. In 12 cycles of serving food to the most diverse collection of beings in 3 sectors, he had never, not once, had anyone suggest that his level 2 cuisine needed improvement. These dishes had sent Bludarian warriors to the medical bay. They had caused Voltarian diplomats to weep tears of liquid nitrogen. They had once forced an entire Mantakian trade delegation to evacuate their ship's dining hall. And these humans wanted them spicier. "Very well," he muttered, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that his species associated with either deep meditation or complete madness. "If authentic alien cuisine is what you desire, then authentic alien cuisine is what you shall receive." He disappeared into the depths of his kitchen, past the standard preparation areas, past the level 2 storage units, into a section that required biometric scanning and a liability waiver just to access. This was his private stock. The collection of dishes that he had accumulated over years of culinary experimentation and what his insurance company liked to call reckless endangerment of customer safety. The container he retrieved bore warning labels in 43 different languages, including several that had been extinct for centuries. The dish inside was known simply as the Infernus Special, and it held the dubious honor of being banned for consumption in 12 different star systems. Not banned for sale, mind you, but banned for existing within the same postal code as civilian populations. Quartermaster had to don a full hazmat suit just to transfer it from storage container to serving dish. The specialized ceramics he used for the bowl had been developed for spacecraft heat shields, and even then, he was not entirely confident in their ability to contain what he was about to unleash. As he returned to the dining area, the ambient temperature rose by several degrees. The air itself seemed to recoil from the approaching dish, creating small eddies and currents that made several smaller species dizzy. A few of the more sensitive beings in the crowd outside began backing away from the viewing ports, their survival instincts finally overriding their curiosity. "Honored human guests," Quartermaster A announced, his voice slightly muffled by the breathing apparatus of his protective gear, "I present the Infernus Special. It is how you say authentic." Commander Tom Mali examined the dish with the same professional interest he had shown everything else. The contents were difficult to focus on directly, seeming to exist in a state of perpetual motion that hurt the eyes and confused the brain. Steam rose from the surface in patterns that definitely violated several thermodynamic principles. "Thank you, Quartermaster," Tom Mali said with genuine appreciation. "This looks much more promising." He picked up the specially reinforced utensil, carefully extracted a portion of the Infernus Special, and consumed it with the methodical precision of someone conducting a scientific experiment. The silence that followed was so complete that you could have heard a photon drop. Commander Tom Malley chewed thoughtfully, his expression gradually shifting from neutral evaluation to something approaching mild interest. He swallowed, paused for a moment to consider the flavors, and then looked up at Quartermaster A with the kind of polite attention that preceded either a compliment or a diplomatic incident. "This is really quite good," he said finally. "The heat profile is much more complex than the previous dishes. But I wonder, do you happen to have any hot sauce to go with it?" Admiral Vashi's crystalline structure underwent what could only be described as a complete phase transition, cycling through colors that had never been observed in nature. Judge Quintara's datapad slipped from nerveless appendages and clattered to the floor. General Kraftnog made a sound that his species had not produced since their ancestors were prey animals fleeing across primordial hunting grounds. Moran's writing had become completely illegible, his tentacles moving in spastic patterns that suggested his nervous system had given up trying to process the information his senses were providing. But it was Quartermaster A who provided the final catalyst for what happened next. "Hot sauce?" he repeated, his voice rising to frequencies that made the surrounding metal fixtures vibrate ominously. "Hot sauce?" The station's emergency alert system, which had been designed to respond to hull breaches, reactor failures, and hostile invasions, suddenly activated across all 7 sectors. Warning lights began flashing in patterns that indicated unknown crisis. "All personnel report to emergency stations immediately." Admiral Drohorn, the station's emergency response coordinator, materialized in the cafeteria within minutes, his aquatic physiology allowing him to move through the station's water-filled emergency conduits faster than the turbo lifts. Behind him came a full medical response team, armed with enough antitoxins and stomach pumps to treat a small army. "What is the nature of the emergency?" Admiral Drohorn demanded, his gills fluttering with the rapid breathing pattern that indicated extreme stress. "Our sensors are detecting radiation signatures consistent with a reactor breach, but the reactor is showing normal function." "The humans," Judge Quintara whispered, pointing toward the table where Brandon Torres was now helping himself to a second serving of the Infernus Special. "They are eating the Infernus Special and asking for condiments." Admiral Drohorn's aquatic features went through several expressions that had no equivalent in land-based species before settling on something that roughly translated to catastrophic system failure. "Evacuate the sector," he ordered the medical team. "Set up a decontamination zone 3 levels down, and someone contact the Galactic Health Authority. We are going to need specialists." Meanwhile, oblivious to the growing chaos around them, the human delegation continued their meal with the casual efficiency of people who had found exactly what they were looking for. Amy Kowalski had moved on to trying combinations of different dishes, creating flavor profiles that were causing the air around her table to glow with residual energy. "You know, Quartermaster," Brandon Torres called out, having apparently decided to offer some constructive feedback. "This would be perfect if you increase the alkaline content by about 15%. That would really bring out the mineral notes in the sulfur compounds." Quartermaster A stared at him through the visor of his hazmat suit. "You want me to make it more alkaline?" "Just a suggestion," Brandon replied cheerfully. "Oh, and maybe a touch more acid on the finish. Something with a nice, clean burn that does not overpower the more delicate flavors." "More acid," Quartermaster A repeated slowly, as if the words were in a language he had never heard before. Amy Kowalski looked up from her experimental flavor combinations, her face bright with enthusiasm. "Quartermaster, this has been absolutely wonderful, but I was wondering, do you happen to serve dessert?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to the fundamental order of the universe. Dessert. After consuming substances that were classified as industrial hazards in most civilized systems, the human was asking about dessert. Around the cafeteria, beings from 17 different species began quietly gathering their belongings and moving toward the exits. This was no longer about a simple wager or culinary pride. This was about witnessing something that would require entirely new branches of science to explain properly. Morden, who had been monitoring the humans' vital signs with increasingly sophisticated equipment, looked at his readings and made the kind of sound that medical professionals make when confronted with data that defies everything they learned in school. Their biochemistry is not just stable, he announced to no one in particular, it is actually improving. The Infernus special appears to be having a beneficial effect on their digestive efficiency. From the crowd of evacuating spectators, someone made a comment that would later be inscribed on the memorial plaque commemorating this day. We are not dealing with a normal species here. We are dealing with something that evolution forgot to give an off switch. Commander Tom Malley, completely unaware that his simple request for hot sauce had triggered a station-wide emergency, smiled politely at Quartermaster A and asked the question that would haunt alien food courts for generations to come. So, about that dessert menu. Moran sat in his quarters 3 hours later, his tentacles cramped from frantic note-taking, staring at data that would fundamentally change xenobiology as a field of study. His research had led him down a rabbit hole of human evolutionary history that made his species' own development look like a pleasant afternoon stroll through a peaceful meadow. It turned out that humans had evolved on a planet that was, by any reasonable standard, actively trying to kill them. Not content with the usual environmental hazards like predators, weather, and geological instability, and Earth had apparently decided to wage chemical warfare against its own inhabitants. Plants had developed increasingly toxic compounds to deter consumption, and instead of developing sensible adaptations like better toxin filtering or avoidance behaviors, some humans had looked at these chemical weapons and decided they made food taste better. Capsaicin, the compound that made Terran peppers burn, was literally designed by evolution to cause pain. It was a plant's way of saying, please do not eat me, I am dangerous. Humans had responded to this clear biological warning by cultivating stronger varieties and inventing hot sauce. The more Moran researched, the more his understanding of human dietary habits shifted from bewilderment to something approaching terror. These beings had not just adapted to consume toxins, they had developed an entire culture around seeking out increasingly dangerous substances for recreational consumption. They had competitions to see who could ingest the most concentrated chemical irritants. They gave awards for the most creative ways to inflict culinary pain on themselves. By comparison, what aliens considered extreme cuisine was roughly equivalent to what humans fed to their sick children. Meanwhile, in the cafeteria, Quartermaster A was experiencing what could only be described as a complete existential breakdown. For 12 cycles, he had built his reputation on serving food that challenged the limits of alien digestive systems. He had been the master of culinary extremes, the chef who could make hardened warriors weep with both pain and pleasure. And he had just watched 3 humans treat his most dangerous creations like appetizers. I do not understand, he kept repeating to himself, all 6 arms gesturing helplessly at his collection of warning labels and liability waivers. The Infernus special once hospitalized an entire Bludarian delegation. It is banned for consumption in 12 systems. It requires a hazmat suit to prepare safely. Admiral Vashi found him there 20 minutes later, still muttering to himself while staring at the empty serving dishes that had somehow survived contact with the Infernus special better than they had survived contact with human digestive acids. Quartermaster, Admiral Vashi said gently, his crystalline form pulsing with colors that indicated deep concern. Perhaps we should discuss what happened here today. What happened? Quartermaster replied, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose entire worldview had been dissolved more thoroughly than his ceramic spoons, is that I have discovered I have been serving baby food to adults for over a decade. Judge Quintera materialized beside them, with the efficient movement of someone who had spent the last 3 hours buried in legal precedents and emergency regulations. Her 3 eyes blinked in the rapid sequence that indicated she had reached a conclusion that satisfied no one, including herself. After extensive review of Galactic food service laws, interspecies dietary regulations, and what I can only describe as the most bizarre set of circumstances ever recorded in legal history, I am declaring the original wager null and void due to impossible circumstances. Impossible circumstances? Admiral Vashi's form flickered between confused and relieved. According to every medical database in known space, What we witnessed today should have resulted in immediate fatalities, followed by a hazardous materials cleanup, followed by extensive legal proceedings for criminal negligence. Judge Quintera gestured toward the human table, where Commander Tom Malley was still politely inquiring about dessert options. Instead, we have 3 humans whose vital signs indicate they are in perfect health and asking for seconds. General Kraftnog approached their group with the careful movements of someone whose entire understanding of combat readiness had been fundamentally altered. His scarred features, which had intimidated enemies across 17 different battlefields, now carried an expression of profound uncertainty. "I would like to request immediate transfer to a safer assignment," he announced without preamble. "Safer?" Admiral Vashi asked. "General, you have served in active combat zones for 20 years. "Yes," General Kraftnog replied, his forearms gesturing emphatically, "but combat zones have rules. Combat zones make sense. You shoot at the enemy, they shoot back, someone wins, someone loses. This." He pointed toward the humans. "This defies the fundamental laws of biology, chemistry, and common sense. I would rather face a Mantakian dreadnought than try to understand how those beings are still conscious." Across the cafeteria, Mordin was packing his medical equipment with the methodical efficiency of someone who had just realized his entire profession was based on incomplete data. His readings indicated that the humans had not only survived their encounter with substances that should have dissolved them from the inside out, but had actually experienced improved digestive function. "I am submitting my resignation from xenobiology," he announced to his assistant. "I am going to retrain as a starship mechanic. Machines make sense. Machines follow predictable rules. Machines do not consume industrial solvents and ask for dessert." Moran looked up from his notes, his primary tentacle poised over what would become the most cited research paper in xenobiological history. Human gastrointestinal anomalies, a study in impossible biology. It would go on to revolutionize the field and win him 3 different academic awards, though he would spend the rest of his career trying to convince his colleagues that he had not fabricated the entire thing. Commander Tom Malley, blissfully unaware of the chaos his dietary preferences had unleashed, but approached Quartermaster A with the kind of genuine enthusiasm that made civilized beings nervous. "Quartermaster, this has been absolutely wonderful. My crew and I cannot thank you enough for such an authentic cultural experience." He paused, his expression brightening further. "In fact, we would love to return the favor. We brought some traditional human seasonings and recipes from Earth. Perhaps we could share some of our favorite dishes with you?" The silence that followed could have been measured in geological epochs. Quartermaster looked at Commander Tom Malley, then at the empty containers that had once held the Infernus Special, then at his collection of hazmat suits and emergency medical equipment. When he spoke, his voice carried the careful tone of someone who had just realized they were standing at the edge of an abyss that went much deeper than originally anticipated. "That is very generous of you, Commander, but I think perhaps we should stick to what we know works." Admiral Vashi nodded rapidly in agreement. "Yes, absolutely. No need to trouble yourselves with cooking. We have everything well in hand here." Judge Quintara was already preparing legal documents that would classify human dietary preferences as a hazardous materials situation requiring special handling permits. General Kraftnog had quietly begun updating his personal will. And Moran continued writing, his tentacles moving in patterns that suggested he was either documenting the most significant xenobiological discovery in recorded history or having a very elaborate nervous breakdown. The only sound in the cafeteria was Amy Kowalski's cheerful voice asking if anyone knew where she might find some good Earth-style coffee to go with whatever they were serving for such dessert. Somehow, that innocent question managed to be more terrifying than anything that had come before. 6 months later, Galactic Station 7's cafeteria bore little resemblance to the establishment that had once prided itself on serving the most challenging cuisine in 3 sectors. The menu board now displayed 2 distinct sections, normal species dining, and what had been diplomatically labeled human insanity level consumption. The normal species section featured the same mild, sensible dishes that had satisfied customers for over a decade. The human section required liability waivers, next of kin notification forms, and a brief consultation with the station's psychological wellness staff to ensure customers understood what they were requesting. Quartermaster A had discovered an entirely new purpose in life. His 6 arms moved with renewed enthusiasm as he crafted dishes that defied not only culinary convention but several fundamental laws of chemistry. What had once been an existential crisis had transformed into the greatest creative challenge of his career. He was no longer just a chef, he was an artist whose medium happened to be substances that could dissolve starship hulls. The trick, he explained to his assistant while wearing full protective gear, is to achieve the perfect balance between immediate tissue damage and long-term digestive satisfaction. It is not enough to simply burn, you must burn with elegance. His masterpiece, a dish he had named the Terran Tribute, required a specialized containment field just to keep it from eating through the serving counter. It had become something of a legend among the human crews that passed through the station, though Quartermaster A still was not entirely convinced they were not just elaborately pranking him. This theory was tested weekly by the arrival of new human delegations who would invariably examine his most extreme creations and ask why everything tasted so bland. Admiral Vashi had spent considerable time crafting an incident report that accurately described the events of that fateful day. The report had been rejected by 7 different departments, flagged by 2 separate review boards as obviously fabricated, and eventually filed under administrative fiction by a clerk who assumed it was someone's creative writing project. "No one believes it," he confided to Judge Quintara during one of their regular debriefing sessions. "I have submitted video evidence, chemical analysis reports, and sworn testimony from 17 witnesses. The response I received from Galactic Command suggested I consider taking an extended vacation for stress-related mental health reasons." Judge Quintara nodded sympathetically while adding another entry to her ever-expanding file labeled Human Dietary Preferences and Associated Galactic Mysteries. The file had grown to encompass 3 data cores and was cross-referenced with departments ranging from xenobiology to hazardous materials management. "I have officially classified human eating habits as a Class 7 unexplained phenomenon," she reported. "It now sits alongside faster-than-light travel, consciousness, and the question of why Voltairian poetry is considered entertainment by anyone." Moran had achieved considerable academic fame for his research paper, though he had learned to avoid discussing the specifics at dinner parties. His follow-up studies had revealed that human tolerance for chemical irritants was just the beginning of their biological anomalies. Humans, it turned out, were anomalies in nearly every measurable category. The peaceful routine of the station was interrupted on a Tuesday morning when a new human transport docked with the usual collection of diplomatic personnel and trade representatives. The crew consisted of 12 humans who had heard about Station 7's reputation for authentic alien cuisine, and had made the journey specifically to experience what they had been told was the real deal. Commander Tom Malley happened to be in the cafeteria when the new arrivals made their first appearance. He watched with growing amusement as the newcomers examined Quartermaster A's human insanity level menu with obvious disappointment. "Excuse me," one of the newcomers called out, "but do you happen to know where we might find some really spicy food around here? This all looks pretty mild." The effect was immediate and devastating. Admiral Vashi's crystalline form underwent what could only be described as a complete system shutdown, cycling through colors that had never been observed in stable matter. Judge Quintara's data pad slipped from nerveless appendages for the 2nd time in 6 months. General Kraft Nog, who had unfortunately been visiting the station on unrelated business, made a sound that registered on seismic monitors 3 levels down. Moran fainted directly into his soup, which was probably for the best, since his nervous system had clearly reached its processing limits. Quartermaster A stared at his carefully crafted human insanity-level menu, which represented 6 months of creative development and several small explosions, being dismissed as pretty mild by beings who had just arrived from a planet that was apparently even more hostile to life than previously believed. "Really spicy?" he repeated weakly, his mandibles clicking in the rapid pattern that indicated either deep meditation or complete system failure. Yeah, you know, the newcomer replied cheerfully, something with a bit of kick to it. We heard this place had a reputation for extreme cuisine. Brandon Torres, who had been quietly enjoying what Quartermaster A considered his most dangerous creation, looked up from his meal with the expression of someone who had just remembered something important. "Oh, right," he said. "Addressing the room in general, I should probably mention that we are thinking about opening our own restaurant. You know, serving real Earth food for humans who want an authentic taste of home." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several species quietly gathering their belongings and heading for the exits. Someone in the back of the crowd made a comment about checking the next transport schedule to anywhere that was very far away from Station 7. Amy Kowalski smiled brightly at Quartermaster A, who was still trying to process the concept of food that was spicier than substances that had been classified as industrial hazards. "Do not worry, Quartermaster," she said with genuine warmth. "We will start small. Maybe just some basic Carolina Reaper sauce and ghost pepper appetizers." Brandon Torres nodded enthusiastically. "And we were thinking about importing some authentic Sequan peppercorns. Nothing too extreme." Commander Tom Malley watched the various alien species evacuating the cafeteria with the bemused expression of someone who still did not quite understand what all the fuss was about. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "I guess we should probably start looking into those restaurant permits." Quartermaster A slowly removed his hazmat gear, hung it carefully on its designated hook, and made a mental note to update his insurance coverage. Again.